Hey everybody, this is Alex Merced from alexmerced.com, and welcome to another episode of Breaking Progressives. Now, before we get into the main topic today, which is going to be basically inequality, the American dream, and a few other things, what I want to do is just point you out to another couple other podcasts that I do. So again, there's the Alex Merced cast, which is my main podcast where I interview people every week and we have discussions about different issues. So recently we had an issue talk discussion about police brutality. We have discussions about Airbnb coming up, discussions about being a conservative libertarian coming up, all sorts of really good stuff. So make sure to check out that podcast, the Alex Merced cast. But I also have Libertarian Comments, which is more of a podcast that's going through all my old audio archives, 2008, 2009, 2010, so that way you can kind of see what I used to say and see how much I've changed and how little I haven't. And the newest of them all is Economics, Why Not? Which is just basically me talking about economics, but more from a understanding economics point of view than less than, some commentary, but mostly more of a economics educational podcast. All of these podcasts are on iTunes, Google Play, Stitcher. Easiest way to find all of them is just to search Alex Merced on iTunes, Google Play, or Stitcher, and you will find all the podcasts I'm in and episodes of other podcasts that I've been invited to, which is, those were a lot of fun. Now, in this episode, what I want to talk about is NPR did a piece about a study regarding, and basically the claim of the study is that this is the first generation that doesn't get the American dream, where basically these kids are not going to get to do as better than their parents did. And the way the study measures that is, one, it measures the income of this generation, the sort of the median income of this generation versus the median income of the last generation, adjusted for inflation. And again, I point that out because this is where we start seeing things go wrong and say, well, it doesn't even keep up. They're actually doing less than their parents did. Okay, so basically if you took the dollar amount they make now, adjusted it for the inflation between the benchmark, it looks like less. Okay, cool. Then when they tried to explain it, they decided to only choose two possible variables. Mistake number 2. Why only two possible variables could possibly be the cause of this phenomena? But they said, okay, let's take a look at growth and let's take a look at inequality. And take a look at these two factors, saying, well, the economy is growing slower than it has been recently, and 2, the growth of inequality. And they're like, oh, well, we're going to say that inequality is causing the bulk of it, because, why not? Because if you take a look at these two variables, the one that we can sort of justify the most out of the two is inequality, but all those other possible variables, technology, healthcare costs, education costs, globalization, all these other things, we won't worry about that. Okay, so overall, and again, if you think I'm exaggerating, I'm linking to the article in the show notes, along with another article that's going to be making a point that I'm going to be making later on. But I don't buy into this whole, the next generation is doing worse than their parents. I just believe that every generation things change, except that the things that are changing between this generation, particularly my generation going forward, is a very drastic change. So the expectations just haven't recalibrated in a sense. People are living longer. So it's expected that the life cycle plays out over a longer period of time. So people expect that, like their parents, that, in your early 20s, you go get a job, you start your career, all this stuff. No. The world has changed in the sense that the jobs that are needed, the demand for labor is there, but the demand for labor is typically for very high skill, very high specialized skill, which that means not only do you have to learn, like let's say learn how to do programming, but you have to learn how to do programming in a specific language, and then learn how to do a specific application of that specific language in a specific situation, which all takes a lot of training. So the idea is that the amount of training, the amount of education that is required for someone to really kind of be self-sustaining takes longer. So it just means that you're kind of a kid longer, but you live longer too. Okay, your parents live longer. So everyone just figured that, if people are living longer, so that means you're just going to retire at the same age and just have a longer retirement. So we need to figure out how we're going to plan for retirement. No, that's not the case. You're going to be taking care of your kids longer. I'm going to be taking care of my kids longer someday. And that's just sort of the nature of things, because again, today's world requires more specialization. So that whole thing is stretched out. And I think Tyler Cowen has actually wrote a little bit about this and kind of hinted at a lot of this in his book, The Great Stagnation, talking about sort of the higher returns to skills or higher skilled labor. Okay? And that's not a bad thing. The fact that the difference between how much high-skilled labor makes right now for certain areas, especially like technologically focused areas, versus non-skilled labor is so huge, that inequality, because that does something very important. It creates an incentive for people to put in that investment, because it's a large investment you have to put in of time and effort. So the payoff's got to be worth it. So if you tried to bridge that inequality, you'd be killing that incentive, or that disincentive to be non-skilled labor. Okay, so basically the idea is that low pay is a disincentive and high pay is an incentive. This helps incentivize people to start putting their time, their resources into the right skills. And when it comes to things like programming, there are plenty of free resources for learning programming, learning the skills that you need. And now with tools like GoFundMe, etc., if you show an earnest effort, it's very possible to earn the funds you need to go to like a boot camp or whatnot once you've developed your skills a little bit. And again, it's very easy to develop your skills for free. There are free programming compilers. There are free videos, textbooks, everything that you would need to really kind of learn is there if you want to learn. The issue is, do you want to learn? Okay? Basically, the only barrier is an internet connection. And something to use internet connection on, which even that the barrier is much smaller. You can buy a Kindle Fire tablet now for basically somewhere between $30 and $50, depending on whether it's on sale or not. Which, that's like a single odd job. You find someone's during the fall, you find someone's lawn to shovel or rake, and you can go buy that tablet and then head over to Starbucks and you have an internet connection. Buy a cup of coffee. The point is, if you want to attain skills, the possibility is there. The barriers to entry are less than they ever were, but it requires more effort than it ever did. Okay, so the costs are a lot less, and that's the other issue. So yes, maybe through real adjusted terms, the dollar amount of take-home pay is less, but what that pay can get you is greater than ever before when it comes to everything except the areas where government has intervened. Basically, when it comes to leisure, your dollar goes a whole lot further. You pay your Netflix bill every month, you're watching a whole lot of movies. You don't necessarily have to pay that huge cable bill anymore. You get a Netflix, a Hulu subscription, and an HBO Go, and upgrade the Showtime on Hulu. Those four, you're talking about maybe max around $50 a month. A lot less than your cable bill. And then basically you can watch most television, the vast majority of television channels, vast majority of quality shows, and you can watch a whole lot more of it a lot more of the time. And then on top of it, there's other benefits to all those subscriptions. Okay, the cost of playing video games. I mean, if you're on your smartphone, you can get high quality video games for a lot less than the $50 you used to pay. And your smartphone does what? It can act as your video game console. It can act as your alarm clock. It can act as your calculator. It can act as you can produce music with it. You can produce podcasts with it, as I'm doing right now. You can do all sorts of things with one device. So while this particular device may be kind of expensive, okay, I'm using an iPhone 7, so like the particular iPhone 7 that I have, if I paid for it without the contract that I have with AT&T, it would probably be like $1,000. But think of all those things I don't have to buy because I have this iPhone. Okay? I mean, you can use it as a camera, you can use it as an audio recorder, you can use it as pretty much everything. Okay? So the point is, those dollars go a lot further. The only areas where your dollars don't go further are in the areas where the government is kind of pretty much botched up. Healthcare, education, and in housing. Okay? Otherwise, everything would be cheaper. If government didn't intervene in the housing market and distort the housing market through its credit policies, same thing with education, where basically the cost of higher education has been pushed up due to really bad credit policies, which has created bad incentives, which I've talked in previous episodes, and we'll talk in future episodes, but not the focus of today's episode. But the bottom line is, you've had a lot of government intervention in the credit for education, the credit for healthcare, and all sorts of different things in healthcare. When it comes to healthcare, read the book The Primal Prescription by Robert Murphy and Doug McGuff. Just the first chapter of that book really nails down a lot of the problems. And actually, you can get the audiobook for free. So if you want to get the audiobook for The Primal Prescription for free, just go to libertydeal.info. If you go to libertydeal.info, there's a link for a free audiobook. Click on that, and you get a free audiobook if you do a trial for Audible. If you don't like it, you can cancel your subscription, but you get to keep the free audiobook. And I recommend getting the Primal Prescription. Listen to it. It really kind of helps understand how healthcare got as screwed up as it did here in the U.S. So you got healthcare, education, and then housing. I mean, if you're someone my age and you're looking to call, it's bizarre how expensive rent is, and it's due to a variety of factors. A lot of it having to do with sort of restrictions on supply and increase in taxes, because people just sit there and want to blame the landlords for asking for too much money, but again, their taxes are constantly going up, so they gotta cover those costs. The cost of maintaining the house, because the cost of actual natural resources are going up, for a variety of reasons. A lot of this having to do with monetary policy. So if they're having to pay their contractors more to come in and fix the stove, to fix the wall, whatnot, that's got to be factored in there. They gotta, and then they also got to make sure they maintain their mortgages and the loans they have against the property. So there's all sorts of different factors that are pushing up these prices that would be different. Okay, because if chances are the loans would have been less, if housing prices weren't growing so fast to begin with, taxes, if they were less, they wouldn't have to increase rent as much. There's all sorts of different things that factor into that. But one point I want to drive out is that a lot of people always point to inequality. They point to, well, if you look at this chart in the 70s, you see that there's a departure between real wages and productivity. And they're like, see, something in the 70s screwed up, and basically we were screwing everybody over, not giving them the raises they should have gotten. And then this is sort of the whole inequality argument, and then they kind of go from there to imply that sort of the breakdown of unions and the breakdown of labor protections starting in the 70s sort of caused this inequality, when that's not really the case. There's a great article that kind of breaks down a documentary, Inequality for All, by Robert Reich, and all the problems in that inequality, which is also going to be in the show notes. But the most important part to me is the healthcare part, because in the article they show that same chart, the one with the real wages, except instead of just using wages, they use total compensation, meaning factoring in how much not only are we paying you in cash, but also paying you in healthcare benefits as well. Because healthcare has been growing up in cost a lot, and that goes back to the whole primal prescription thing. So if you factor in total compensation, so basically increases in your pay, increases in the dollars spent on the healthcare benefits that your employer provides you, that almost explains the full difference. Okay, so bottom line is those increases in productivity, they weren't taken from you, they just gone to help pay for your healthcare, because your healthcare costs have gone up. And again, if you want to understand why healthcare costs are going up, read the Primal Prescription. So, kind of getting back to the point here is there's a lot of different I challenge the idea that people aren't necessarily doing better off this generation. That I think there's a lot of reason to think they are doing better off. And in the only areas where they aren't, education, housing, healthcare, these are areas that they would be doing better off if it wasn't for the government intervention that currently exists in these areas. 2, when it comes to the whole idea of inequality, I think there's good statistical information. The one challenge that the sort of growing income inequality, so taking a look at that sort of gap between wages and inequality, there again, healthcare can explain that, but also taking a look at the difference between sort of the highest earners and lowest earners can be explained by, again, a difference in the rewards for different levels of skills, which creates an incentive, because right now there is a need for people with those skills, so there needs to be an incentive for those people. And basically the only reason it's growing is because people aren't taking that incentive fast enough. Okay, and basically once people start investing in those skills and really kind of entering the labor market with those skills, what's going to happen is you're going to see that higher level go down, because there'll be more people doing those jobs, and that always just causes wages to go down. So these things can kind of fix themselves over time, but we have to encourage people to make those investments in time and skills. Also, the fact that not only are there reasons as far as the technology that we have today that think that life is better for people today than the previous generation, but also our longer life cycle can explain a lot of the changes in sort of when we hit certain milestones in this generation. And then inequality in itself as a causal reasoning for this is weird, because it's the way basically the article is saying inequality is the cause of inequality, which is a bizarre statement to make. Because they're saying that this inequality between the parents' outcomes and children's outcomes, it's caused by the inequality between the rich and the poor. But the inequality in the rich and the poor is something you measure post it occurring. Okay, and then the inequality is not what caused the inequality. Like the gap between the rich and the poor didn't happen because inequality. That doesn't follow. So the inequality is more of a signal of something that may be a problem. Okay, I don't think it's unplausible to think that a large gap between people doing well and people who don't do well means there's no problem. There are people who do better for reasons because they've built cozy relationships with government, or because government has put barriers for people at the bottom to make it harder for them to rise up, such as like taxes and regulations that make it harder for people who don't have resources to start a business, to invest in new skills, because they're not necessarily as well equipped to deal with those costs. So in that regard, there could be an element of that. I do think there's an element of that, but that's not inequality. Those are things that may contribute to the inequality. But then the equality is more of an outcome signal more than saying, oh, that's a cause. Because if you think of inequality as a cause, then you come up with all sorts of really weird solutions, saying, which is the whole tax the rich more and give it to the people who are less well off. And the result of that would be disastrous, because then what happens is that you just, that incentive for the high skill investment diminishes, because you're saying, okay, well, we're going to take the extra money you're making, give it to these other people, but then the result is then the incentive to put in that extra time, that extra work to develop those skills is going to be less, which means less people are going to do that. So then that kind of offsets it. And then two, at the bottom, you're going to overly incentivize people to go into non-skilled labor, which means you're going to have a continued glut of non-skilled labor. So this is sort of the wrong way to go about things. When people talk about like using taxes to fix the inequality issue, because the inequality is not necessarily an issue. It may be a signal, but then you have to ask what's causing that signal, not, oh, the signal is causing the signal. So overall, that's my thoughts on this article, on this study. Hopefully you guys enjoyed it. Thank you very much. Have a great day. Enjoy. Again, this is Breaking Progressives with Alex Merced. If you want to get that free audiobook on the Primal Prescription, go over to libertydeal.info. And make sure to subscribe to all my other podcasts and leave a positive review for this podcast and tell your friends about this podcast. Thank you very much.